This is the first film from a director called Mariel Heller. It's based on a semi-autobiographical novel by a writer and cartoonist called Phoebe Gluckner, which is set in San Francisco in the 1970s. And it centres on Minnie Getz, who's a 15-year-old who is jumping from childhood into adulthood with what could only really be described as ravenous abandon. She's seizing on her kind of her changing body and her new perceptions of the world around her, and is recording everything that's happening to her into this tape recorder every night in order to kind of keep track and analyse and kind of fathom her way out around how the world is. Her mother, who is played by Kristen Wiig, is not particularly much help in getting her in touch with how the world actually is. Here is a typically awkward conversation between the two of them.
When I was in high school, boys were all over me.
Like my dad?
Yeah. Yeah, your dad and I were crazy about each other. He wasn't messed up then. I mean, he was just a wannabe artist with a the world attitude. And he rode a Triumph Blackbird. Have I ever told you that? It was fantastic. And my parents hated him. It was so hot. You know, you're not gonna have that bod forever, man. I know that's not very feminist of me to say, but you might be happier if you put it out there a little bit, you know? Wear some makeup, wear a skirt once in a while. Jesus. Get some attention. You have a kind of power, you know, you don't know it yet.
And my parents hated him. It was so rad. The script for this is just
fantastic.
It's
It's a great line. Now, the actress who plays Minnie is a British actress called Belle Powley. She was in A Royal Night Out earlier this year playing Princess Margaret. This is a real kind of a serious star-making performance.
She's fantastic.
She's 23 years old. She plays 15 totally convincingly. And not just the naive 15-year-old at the start of the film, but she expresses this organic move from that state of naivety to this more worldly wise. Still, you know, a girl in the middle of her teens at the end of the film, but is kind of soaking up all the kind of details of the world around her. She wants to be a cartoonist. And this is kind of a recurring motif in the movie, is that her cartoons that are in her head come spilling out into the real world. And this can sound possibly a little like, you know, an affectation, a little bit kind of hipster, a little bit kind of too try-hard indie. But what's great about this is it's her kind of clothing the world in her own thoughts and trying to suss them out and trying to make sense of what's going on.
It's the wallpaper of her mind, isn't it?
Exactly. And one of the main things she's trying to make sense of is Monroe, who is her mum's boyfriend, who's played by Alexander Skarsgård. He's 35 years old, and Minnie basically decides that she's going to seduce him because in that way that when you're a teenager, you don't really understand your place in the world. You don't really know what's kind of right and what's wrong in those senses. And she decides that this guy might be her only chance of a sexual relationship in her life. So she goes out of her way to seduce him. And Monroe, being a bit of a deadbeat who lounges around on the settee all day watching children's television programmes, decides to kind of let this happen. And he will absolve responsibility of this by calling Minnie during the film things like a nymphomaniac. And it's this idea that, you know, she's not that. But her forthright manner is because she doesn't understand where she fits in the world yet. And she's kind of feeling her way. And I think this is the real kind of sticking point with the BBFC that felt in this film, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they've kind of misinterpreted that for an endorsement of what she actually does. I think, you know, this film is totally... It has a joyful explosiveness about it. In the same way, actually, as Blue is the Warmest Colour, the French coming-of-age movie that came out a couple of years ago, which I totally loved. That film, though, felt mediated through an older gaze, and I think unmistakably a male gaze as well. You know, you were kind of looking in on this relationship between these two beautiful young women, thinking, oh, you know, how wonderful to be so young and so intensely in love and so passionate. What The Diary of a Teenage Girl does is it just eyeballs you straight down the barrel of the camera and says, this is how it is. You know, you are not looking in on something else. You are part of this. You've experienced this. This is how life felt for you. And it gets that totally right. And, you know, rumbling away in the background as well, I should say, is this subplot to do with Patty Hearst, who was this socialite who was kidnapped during the 1970s. It was a news story in San Francisco. And people are kind of watching this story unfold on the news, and they're saying, you know, what happened was she was abducted by a cult and they ended up doing bank robberies and all sorts of crimes. It was this idea was, you know, was she brainwashed? Could she be judged to be in control of her actions as a 17-year-old, or was she kind of, were things impressed upon her at the time? This incredibly clever and subtle parallel is drawn between this big dramatic news story that's unfolding nationally and also Minnie's own life, because she's in exactly the same situation. You know, are people making her do what she does? Is she in charge of what she's doing? Who knows? It's up for discussion.
I'm never a big fan of the word of the cold kind of coming of age film sort of thing, but I think this is just such an honest depiction of that whole kind of word, and a great exploration of it as well.
And there is such a double standard in this genre, because lots of coming of age films, 99% of them surely, are around male characters. And there's
Yeah.
a sense of watching these guys, you know, have their first kind of fumbling experiences with a girl. And there's this kind of, go on, my son, come on, get in there, you know, do your best. And when it flips and it's a female character,
Yeah.
we can't handle it and everyone
Yeah.
goes crazy.